Inside the phone in your hand, the electric car in your driveway, and the fighter jet defending your skies, there is a set of metals almost nobody has ever heard of: rare earth elements. 17 obscure metals that quietly make modern technology possible, and almost the entire global supply of them runs through a single country. China refines around 90% of the world's rare earths. Not 60, not 70, 90. If that one supply chain were ever fully cut, much of the modern world would simply grind to a halt. Now, the official explanation for this is that it is all just geology, that China happens to sit on most of the planet's deposits and got lucky. But that explanation is almost entirely wrong, because rare earths, despite the name, are not actually rare at all. The true story of how one nation came to control the lifeblood of the modern economy is far stranger than luck. It is a trap that the West built with its own hands and now cannot find a way out of. This is the rare earth war. To understand the trap, you first have to ask who actually built this industry, and it was not China. For about 2 decades, from the 1960s to the 80s, the world's leading source of rare earths was a single mine in the California desert called Mountain Pass. For a time, America led. Then in the 1980s, China made a deliberate, strategic choice. Its paramount leader, Deng Xiaoping, reportedly observed that while the Middle East had oil, China had rare earths. Beijing decided it wanted to own this industry completely, and it held 2 enormous advantages: cheap labor and a willingness to ignore the staggering environmental cost. Because here is the dirty secret at the heart of this whole story. Refining rare earths is brutally toxic. It produces rivers of acid and mountains of low-level radioactive waste. In the Chinese mining city of Baotou, a vast artificial lake of black, poisonous sludge eventually spread for miles, so contaminated that nearby settlements became known as cancer villages. It was an environmental catastrophe on a scale the West simply had no stomach for, and so the West was quietly delighted to let somebody else do the poisoning. So Chinese producers, heavily backed by the state, sold their output cheaper than anyone else on the planet could possibly match. One by one, mines and refineries everywhere else were driven out of business. Mountain Pass itself went bankrupt and shut its gates. By the early 2000s, the West had handed China a near-total monopoly and congratulated itself on the bargain. Almost nobody stopped to ask what would happen if the country that now controlled these metals ever chose to use that control as a weapon. So let's clear up the single biggest myth of all. Rare earths are not rare. Most of them are actually more common in the Earth's crust than gold or silver. You can find traces of them on almost every continent on the planet. The challenge was never finding them. The real challenge is what comes after you dig them out of the ground. The 17 elements are chemically almost identical and stubbornly bound together inside the very same ore. Separating them into pure, usable materials takes hundreds of delicate chemical steps, enormous amounts of energy, and decades of hard-won expertise. The core process is called solvent extraction, and it can involve hundreds of repeated stages of dissolving and washing in long cascades of tanks that stretch the length of a building. It is exactly the kind of slow, hazardous, low-margin work that no rich country wanted to keep. This is the true choke point, and it is not the mine, it is the refinery. So look carefully at where China's real power actually sits. It controls perhaps 70% of the world's rare earth mining, but it controls roughly 90% of the refining. And when it comes to forging those metals into the powerful magnets that drive electric motors and wind turbines, China's share climbs to well over 90%. So even when a brand new mine opens somewhere else in the world, the raw ore very often still has to be shipped all the way to China just to be processed. The West can dig things up. What it mostly cannot do is refine them. And that one quiet, unglamorous gap is the entire game. For years, Almost nobody seemed to notice or to care. And then in 2010, the world got a violent wake-up call. A bitter territorial dispute flared up between China and Japan over a chain of tiny uninhabited islands. A Chinese fishing boat collided with the Japanese Coast Guard, and its captain was arrested. Beijing's response stunned the entire world. It quietly halted rare earth exports to Japan, the manufacturing heart of the global electronics industry. For a country like Japan, this was an economic chokehold around the throat, and the message to everybody else was absolutely unmistakable. China was now willing to turn its monopoly into a weapon. And around the same time, it sharply slashed its export quotas to the rest of the world, and prices went completely berserk. Some rare earth elements jumped in price by more than 10 times in a matter of months. Suddenly, every single government on Earth understood just how exposed it really was. The United States, Europe, and Japan dragged China to the World Trade Organization, and they eventually won the case. China backed down on the formal quotas. Japan, badly burned, quietly went to work, building up stockpiles, investing in a rival producer over in Australia, and pioneering ways to pull the metals back out of old electronics. It had learned its lesson. Almost nobody else did. But then the panic slowly faded, prices crashed back down to earth, and the world, with a long sigh of relief, simply went back to sleep. That, as it turns out, was exactly the problem. Here is the part of the story that almost nobody truly understands. The West did, in fact, try to break free. After the 2010 shock, money poured into reviving Mountain Pass out in California. A company called Molycorp raised well over $1 billion and reopened the mine, promising at last to end the dependence on China. And then China did something far cleverer than any crude embargo. It simply let the global price of rare earths collapse. By flooding the market with cheap, abundant supply, Beijing quietly made it impossible for any Western producer to turn a profit. Within just a few years, Molycorp went spectacularly bankrupt. Mountain Pass was eventually sold off, and a slice of it even ended up in Chinese hands. And this was not a one-time trick, it is a repeatable pattern. Every time prices rise just enough to tempt a new Western project to life, Beijing can open the taps, drown the market in cheap supply, and let that project quietly die in what the industry grimly calls the Valley of Death. This is the real trap, and it is brutally elegant. China's deepest weapon was never simply cutting you off. It is the ability to bankrupt anyone who dares to compete. Building a rare earth refinery takes 10 to 15 years, billions of dollars, and the sheer patience to survive China deliberately crashing the price the very moment you start to get close. No private company on Earth can win that fight on its own. And so, even knowing the danger, even after every warning, the West just kept sliding deeper into dependence, because escaping it simply did not pay. And now, the stakes are exploding, because the two biggest forces shaping our future both run, quite literally, on rare earths. The first is the green transition. The powerful permanent magnets made from these metals are what make electric motors and wind turbines efficient enough to work at all. A single electric car needs around 1 kilogram of them. A single large wind turbine can need many hundreds of kilograms. As the whole world races to electrify, demand for these magnets is projected to multiply several times over in the decades ahead. The second force is military. Modern weapons are absolutely saturated with rare earths, guidance systems, radar, lasers, drones, all of it. According to one U.S. congressional report, a single F-35 fighter jet contains an estimated 400 kilograms of rare earth materials, and a single attack submarine several tons. And rare earths are only the sharpest edge of a much larger problem. China also dominates the processing of lithium, of cobalt, and of graphite, the basic building blocks of almost every battery on the planet. In recent years, it has already curbed exports of niche but vital metals like gallium and germanium. simply to remind the world that it can. In other words, the West is now building both its clean energy future and its national defense on a foundation that it does not control and that is supplied by its single greatest strategic rival. And just to drive the point home, in recent years, China has begun restricting exports all over again, this time targeting the very technology used to process these metals. The screws, in other words, are tightening, not loosening. So, can the West actually break the grip? Finally, and very belatedly, it is at least trying. Mountain Pass is running once again under new owners, and is now racing to build its very own processing on American soil so that the raw ore no longer has to sail across the Pacific to China. Over in Australia, a company called Linus has become the largest rare earth producer anywhere outside China and is building brand new refineries, including one on American soil, partly with Pentagon money. Europe, for its part, has passed a critical Raw Materials Act, setting hard targets to mine, to process, and to recycle far more of its own supply, and to never again lean too heavily on any single country. Governments are now funding recycling, strategic stockpiles, and partnerships with friendly nations, an approach often called friend-shoring. But the numbers are genuinely sobering. Today, only a tiny fraction of rare earths is ever recovered from old devices. And in a pointed warning shot, China recently banned the export of its rare earth processing technology altogether, making it even harder for anyone else to ever learn the trick. But none of this is fast, and absolutely none of it is cheap. Rebuilding an entire toxic, fiendishly complex supply chain from scratch takes a decade or more, and China still holds the power to make the whole thing unprofitable whenever it chooses to. The uncomfortable truth is that the West gave this industry away in a single generation, and buying its way back in will take at least another one. The rare earth war teaches the very same hard lesson that runs right through this entire channel. Real power rarely sits where it looks like it should. It is not always in the spectacular thing, the deposit buried in the ground, or the finished gadget gleaming on the shelf. Very often, it hides in the boring, difficult, unglamorous middle, the refining, the processing, the dirty step that nobody else actually wants to do. So the next time someone tells you a country is powerful simply because it owns some resource, ask the sharper question instead: who actually controls the part that everyone else depends on? Next time on this channel, we follow the money into another hidden choke point, one that quietly shapes the whole of the modern world economy. If you want to keep seeing the real map of power for what it truly is, then subscribe, and I will see you in the very next one.